cases and vaccine rollout in Australia. So very briefly, I'm pleased to be able to report that there have been 0 cases of community transmission in Australia in the last 24 hours. That makes 46 days over the course of 2021 without any cases. Particularly important is the fact of 2 things. One, on the weekend, as we know, there were individual cases in each of Queensland and New South Wales. Since that time, there has been only 1 connected case, and so that's an incredibly important sign about the strength of containment. Equally important is something that didn't happen. 2 cases, 2 states, no border closures. Very interesting development for Australia, and a very heartening development, that not only are we containing the cases, there's increasing trust in the ability of other states to contain the cases. So 2 cases, 2 states, no border closures. I think that's a very significant moment for Australia, and that is, I believe, linked to the progressive rollout of the vaccines. We're having increasing confidence in our containment. But where we're at now is we've seen 22,500 vaccinations in the last 24 hours. By the end of today, we're expecting to have over 240,000 vaccinations, over 570 aged care clinics with first doses, and over 50 aged care clinics with second doses, and over 50,000 aged care residents who will have been vaccinated. So I think that's very important. In addition, we were pleased to see that Queensland was quickly able to adjust their advice after the TGA did their rapid review and provided their conclusions that the AstraZeneca vaccine was safe and that there were no adverse events that were out of line with that which was ordinarily expected. And I think that was an important sign of confidence, both in terms of action by one jurisdiction, response by the Commonwealth, and then calm in that jurisdiction again. As the rollout continues, firstly I want to thank our GPs. They are standing up, and to have Michael Kidd here, who has been not only the president of the RACGP, but has been a world leader and as well as a practising GP for many years himself. It's important to understand that we have more than 3 times the vaccine required for every Australian. So there's more than enough vaccines for every Australian, and as we begin phase 1B, which involves 6 million people, next week we'll see approximately 250,000 vaccines available. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. But as we've seen, we've been heartened by the early response of the public. In terms of the eligibility checker, 381,000 people visited the eligibility checker yesterday at health.gov.au. I'm informed that over 98% were able to immediately connect, and the vast majority of others who attempted on subsequent occasions were then able to connect. So an over 98% immediate connection rate. 28,000 registered for phase 2, well beyond phase 1B already, which I think is great, and they'll all be provided with automated notes. In terms of our general practices, today we are releasing the list of what are called GP respiratory clinics or Commonwealth vaccination clinics. There's over 100 of those clinics, and they are larger clinics. They will take patients in the order they arrive, and you don't have to be a member of that practice. And they'll have doses of up to 2,000 with an average of just under 1,000 per week per clinic. And they are available on the website. Bookings commence tomorrow. So today is a pre-release. Bookings commence tomorrow. Please don't try to do those bookings today. And that's an important step forward. That adds very significantly to our capability. In terms of the doses, I would say this, that our dose rollout to the general practice clinics, I'm advised that we started early yesterday. We were intending on starting today. We actually started deliveries a day early. So by the end of today, 870 clinics will have received their vaccines on the current advice. And then over the course of tomorrow, over 300 more clinics will receive their vaccines, and that's a combination of the GP clinics and the Commonwealth vaccination clinics. So we are ahead of schedule in that dose delivery. It wasn't intended to start today, but we actually got ahead and started it early yesterday. And finally, I do want to say that a special thanks to our GPs. As we know, they've been with us the whole of the way. Michael was one of the co-designers of the telehealth system, which has transformed, not just temporarily, but transformed the delivery of medicine and Medicare services in Australia on a permanent basis. This is a marathon, not a sprint, but I'm very pleased that we've had high public interest, which has always been the case with every phase of the pandemic, that when something is announced, there's very high public interest, that then normalises. We're already seeing that today. Bookings have been occurring around the country. We've got numerous examples of bookings that are in place, and as these vaccines are arriving, the practices are feeling more and more comfortable. So we are expecting practices to have the vaccines, as was always the case, by the middle of the weekend, but it does look as if we're going to be ahead of schedule with that delivery, with the vast majority, if not all, receiving them today and tomorrow. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Minister. The rollout of the vaccine through general practices right across Australia from next week is a very exciting development in our nation's vaccination program. And I would like to thank everyone involved in the nation's general practices who will be providing these vaccines as a service to the members of their local communities. So thank you to my fellow GPs, to our nation's practice nurses, our receptionists and practice managers, our cleaners, everyone who's involved in our general practices, who's going to be involved in the rollout of these vaccines. As the Minister has said, the Australian Government's been working steadily and consistently throughout the pandemic with our nation's general practices. I've been having discussions over the past couple of weeks with colleagues right around the country discussing their plans for their rollout of the vaccine and their prioritisation, in many cases, of the most senior members of their practice populations, making sure that the most elderly people in Australia are receiving protection first. We have, as the Minister has said, over 1,000 general practices which will be rolling out the vaccines next week, and in addition those over 100 Commonwealth-funded GP-led respiratory clinics which were initially set up to do COVID-19 testing and are now pivoting to roll out the vaccines in communities right across the country. My message to everyone is please do not panic. There is plenty of vaccine. Everyone who wishes to get vaccinated in Australia will be able to be vaccinated. We're only starting phase 1B next week, and this will be running for several weeks to come. And please be polite and calm when you're talking to the receptionists in your local general practice. These are wonderful, committed people who are supporting the vaccine effort and, of course, support us every day in making sure we can get the appointments we need when we need them with our chosen GPs. This is Australia's largest mass immunisation program. It brings with it many challenges, but we have a strong health system and we have excellent healthcare professionals who are working together to deliver this vaccine for us all. Thanks, Minister.
Okay. Rachel? Oh, sorry. 1, 2. Yep.
Minister Hunt, New South Wales Premier says they've got 100 state-based vaccination clinics ready to go to do vaccines. In January, you said that state vaccination clinics would be used as part of the vaccination rollout when we've got AstraZeneca. Why are there no state clinics coming online from next week? Are they going to be used?
No, the states are receiving significant amounts of vaccine, and it's entirely a matter for the states. So when you think of it this way, we have over the course of the next week, the states and territories will be receiving over 150,000 vaccines. The general practices, 200,000 vaccines. The Commonwealth clinics will have over 50,000 vaccines, and then there's 100,000 that are reserved for frontline workers and for aged care. So there's 150,000 vaccines that are provided to the states, so they are free to set up as soon as they feel comfortable. The combination of the Pfizer hubs for the Pfizer vaccines, and most have been doing that. In fact, all have been doing that. and then as they are ready to do that, the AstraZeneca. We know, for example, many states are vaccinating with AstraZeneca now. So there are no barriers and there are vaccines.
Minister, how do you expect the TGA to approve the locally manufactured doses of AstraZeneca?
So I understand that's on track. The TGA does operate as an independent body, so we're expecting that over the course of the coming days. But the vaccines for next week are already being distributed. Claire? Oh, sorry, go 1, 2, 3, 4.
Who's staffing the Commonwealth clinics for the vaccination? Is it being contracted out and then also, is it possible to book weeks, months in advance if people want to get an appointment, later on?
I'll start with Michael.
So the staffing of the Commonwealth GP-led respiratory clinics, so the people who've been staffing these clinics throughout the pandemic, and this is local general practitioners who've established the clinics, working with their practice nurses. In some cases they've employed additional nurses and doctors to work with them to support them.
So as an example, where we went, Carrum Downs, to have our vaccinations, myself and Julia Gillard and Brendan Murphy, and then some of our wonderful health workers. You have an existing general practice clinic, and then they have established side by side with that a testing clinic, and now 106 of those commencing this week, and we're expecting that will grow to over 125 of those will also become Commonwealth vaccination clinics. So they're taking their existing staff, they're supplementing it if they need it, so it's general practice led. They're technically called general practice respiratory clinics, but to simplify it, Commonwealth vaccination clinics. Then the period over which they book will be up to each clinic, but some clinics will choose to do longer periods, but there are no barriers from a Commonwealth perspective for clinics booking at any time over the Commonwealth over the next 12 weeks.
Mr Hunt, will the 100 Commonwealth clinics provide non-Medicare visa holders access to the COVID-19 vaccines?
Michael, did you want to add something?
Yes, they will. So people who don't have a Medicare card are able to get their vaccines either through the state and territory hubs, which have already been established, or through one of the Commonwealth GP-led respiratory clinics.
Great.
Can I just ask about the situation in Queensland?
Yeah.
There seems to have been some mixed messages about people with severe allergic reactions. What is the official advice? Should they be holding off getting the vaccine, or should they just be talking to their GPs first?
So on the official advice, I'll go to Professor Michael Kidd. But in terms of the situation, Queensland had a small number of cases. I believe there were 4 cases where they had suspected or confirmed anaphylaxis. On the basis of that, they put in a very temporary cautionary note whilst the TGA made the assessment. The TGA was able to provide comfort. I spoke along with Professor Murphy with the Queensland Health Minister and her CEO, our Chief Medical Officer and the TGA were also able to work with Queensland. TGA advice was presented here yesterday. Queensland changed their position back to the existing ATAGI advice, or the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation, by the end of the day, that if you have anaphylaxis, please go, but 30 minutes waiting time.
That's correct. So the ATAGI advice remains the same. The precaution is for those, though, who have had anaphylaxis related to a past vaccine. So if you've had anaphylaxis related to a first dose of the vaccine, obviously you need to discuss with a doctor before you get the second dose. That may need to be done in a separate, in a hospital or other facility.
Every day there are challenges, and we try to solve them in real time. Yourself, and then Michelle.
Mr Hunt, just in regards to Queensland, given they'd already been provided this advice, it was the existing ATAGI advice, did they panic yesterday? Have they damaged vaccine confidence, and what needs to be done to rebuild that vaccine confidence after we saw the position change 3 times in the space of 12 hours?
So, look, I would say they were being cautious. There's no criticism from the Commonwealth. We are here to assist the states and territories if they have issues. There is a vaccine operations centre which automatically assesses any reports of what are called adverse events. Adverse events are where there is a subsequent event, and what they look for is whether or not there's any causation. No causation, outside of anaphylaxis, which does follow and has always been anticipated as an event associated with medicines, any other types of vaccines, and including these vaccines, anaphylaxis is an accepted condition. In particular, though, we were able to provide the advice, and so we'll work constructively with all the states and territories. Every day there are challenges, and every day we try to solve them.
Given it was a known condition that could take place, should they have at least consulted with the TGA before making a public announcement and causing confusion about what to do?
Look, I'll leave that to Queensland. We were able to solve it once it was drawn to our attention within a very short number of hours and provide the comfort and confidence. One of the things that we have been really strong on in Australia is providing the confidence. I think John Skerritt was great yesterday when he told us about his own issues with rabbits. Secondly, what he confirmed was that around the world, by definition, there are events, and those events are not necessarily related by causation to vaccines or medicines or other things, that a certain number of ordinary life events will inevitably occur, with or without vaccines, and his job, the TGA's job, the medical authority's job, is to look for any link or causation. Michelle?
The Prime Minister said yesterday Australia was making urgent representations to get doses for PNG out of Australia's stock. Have you had any response yet from European authorities and from European manufacturers? And if not, are you going to push that process along, and how?
No, thanks. So the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and myself have all written to our European counterparts. I have spoken last night with the global head of AstraZeneca about making sure that we proceed with a request through the European processes. They actually have to make a formal request, and our diplomats on the ground in Europe are working with the European Commission, and so that process is underway. But the Prime Minister, myself and the Foreign Minister have all written requesting that, given that this is a humanitarian disaster potentially relating to COVID in a developing nation, that deep humanity should see these vaccines released. We are willing to forego those million from Australia in order to assign them to PNG. We're not expecting an answer immediately. We know that Europe has to go through its processes.
What
but
sort of response did you get from AstraZeneca?
AstraZeneca is contracted to Australia, so they will be making
Were they
these.
sympathetic or?
Well, they've been doing their best to provide vaccines to Australia, and we've received 700,000 vaccines to Australia. I'll let them speak for themselves, but they've been very sympathetic about the fact that this is one way to assist, not only fulfil the Australian contract, but also to provide the humanitarian relief which they believe in. I'll start here and then...
Turning attention surprisingly to WA, 2 people have obviously suffered severe allergic reactions in WA as well. Contrastingly to Queensland though, it wasn't just from one batch of AstraZeneca, it was from a Pfizer jab and an AstraZeneca jab. Is that more concerning? Is there a concern about the impact that will have to perception to both of those vaccines? What's your response to the situation in WA more generally? So,
look, Western Australia is doing a great job. Around the country, as of yesterday, and I haven't had the updated figures today, I apologise, there had been 19 cases of anaphylaxis. They could be mild or they could be more severe. That's consistent with global projections across all of the different vaccines. Michael?
That's right. We expect to get a small number of these reactions occurring, these allergic reactions. It's part of what we know about the vaccines, and it's why it's so important that when people have received their vaccine, that they stay and get observed for 15 minutes after the vaccine, so that we can make sure that they're not going to have one of these reactions. Vast majority of people, if they are going to get a reaction, it occurs in that 15-minute period.
So I'll be very quick.
There's the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian said under the current program her state won't meet the October target. She mentioned concerns about communications with GP as well as supply.
I haven't seen the comments, so I won't respond to them directly. The Prime Minister and Professor Murphy set out our plan to ensure that every Australian receives a first dose before October, and we remain on track to do that. Tamsin?
Minister, how real is the threat of Europe blocking vaccines coming into Australia for Australia, but then also vaccines into other parts of the world?
Well, certainly they've reaffirmed that view about vaccines remaining in Europe. That is a deep concern for us. We haven't factored any of the remaining 3.1 million AstraZeneca vaccines into Australia's rollout. We've taken the most cautious approach. We obviously believe that contracted vaccines should be supplied to the world, not just Australia. Right now our focus is on ensuring support for our friends and neighbours in PNG.
My question was on Gladstone as well. I won't ask you to respond to the comments directly, but the Premier of the biggest state in the country has continually voiced some concerns around, you know, the numbers, the supply, communication, that sort of thing. What is yourself, Prime Minister, the government more broadly doing to try and, I guess, bridge that gap with the premiers who might be voicing
Well,
these
we meet with them regularly. I'm due to meet with the health ministers in the next 24 hours. We speak with them through the department. We speak with them directly on an almost daily basis. All of the health ministers are meeting weekly at the moment. But I will point out, as I say, in the coming week, over 150,000 vaccines to the states, 200,000 to the GPs. But of course, those GPs are all within state borders, and all the Commonwealth vaccinations, the more than 50,000 for the GP respiratory clinics, all within state borders, and then finally, of course, the 100,000 for a mixture of aged care and the frontline emergency workers, all within state borders.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. It was a year ago this week that we began putting in restrictions on crowd gatherings. We were 2 days away from shutting the international border and then beginning lockdown. Here we are now. We've got a vaccine where we didn't think it would be possible by some people in the scientific community. We've avoided the number of deaths that other countries have seen. What do you sort of put down that Australian performance to? Did you think that we would be where we are today, you know, with things like phenomenal job numbers and things like that today, where we were 12 months ago when you were sort of doing these daily briefings?
I think Australia has outperformed even our best expectations. Australia and Australians have been magnificent, and I think we should share the gratitude and the thanks for that. Whether it's state and territory, whether it's the Commonwealth decisions on sovereign vaccine manufacturing capability or border closures or the containment and capacity strategy, our GPs are our heroes. And I want to re-emphasise that today. Our nurses are our heroes, our pathologists, and then the Australian public. All of those people have shown, I think, we are a better country than perhaps we've always given ourselves credit. I think Australians are stronger and better than they've credited. Now, there was one right up the back who's been very patient. If you...
Yes, so just on Gladys Berejiklian, and given that this is a state leader who is very concerned about the rollout, what is your reaction that she's come out with this goal but is clearly concerned that the federal and state governments aren't working together on this?
Look, we are due to meet with health ministers in the next 24 hours, and what I'd say is that 150,000 vaccines to the states. New South Wales is doing a great job. We have seen a record number of vaccinations in the last 24 hours, and it is difficult because we have high levels of demand. We've been able to secure international supplies against the trend that was raised about the European Union. We've been able to secure those international supplies, but now we have sovereign vaccine manufacturing capability. And the key message at the end of the day is be patient. There are enough vaccines for every Australian 3 times over. And as they come on board and as that supply is provided, then we're able to provide that response. Now, the pandemic has been a great challenge, and at different times there have been stresses and other things, but what ultimately we've seen is patience, resilience and commitment from all Australians, and we've got a little bit more of that to do. But honestly, you would rather be in Australia than anywhere else in the world. Thank you very much.